The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents The Claimed Resurrection of Daniel Ekechukwu. Hey everybody, I did a debate recently about the resurrection, and one of the jokes that I made early on was that for all I know, my opponent's not even here to talk about the resurrection of Jesus. Could be some other resurrection. And one of the questions I had was, why are we discounting resurrections or resurrection reports that aren't, for example, biblical? And my opponent, or interlocutor, however you prefer, because it was a discussion more than a debate, presented the case of Daniel Ekechukwu, who was a pastor in Nigeria, who reportedly was in a car accident with his brother in the car and suffered a head injury and died. And 2 days, on the third day, I just did a video about it on the third day, but on the third day, he was resurrected at a sort of mission meeting, church service from a German pastor. Now, this happened supposedly in 2001, around November or December. There are a number of websites, if you dig around, and especially if you get into the Wayback Machine, that have some information about this. The first problem is that the facts are kind of unclear, and some of them are in dispute. The second problem is that we don't have good information. For example, I'm going to start with a web archive testimonial account from the old cfan.org website, which is the christforallnations.org. So it's cfan.org. This is in their 2003, I think, web page, which was, when you look at it, it looks like it's 2003. So it says, on the morning of November 30th, 2001, Daniel Ekechukwu, the pastor of the Power Chapel Evangelical Church in Onitsha, with his friend, Kingsley Eruka, who later I heard was his brother, took a Christmas present of a goat to his father in a village near the town of Uweri. Daniel drove his 20-year-old Mercedes 230. On the way back home, traveling down a steep road, the Mercedes brakes failed. Daniel could do nothing. Gathering speed, the vehicle hurtled downhill, unstoppable. The career and Daniel's ended as it smashed into a stone pillar. Without a seatbelt, Daniel was catapulted violently forward. His head hit the windscreen and the steering wheel, and a knob punched him in his body. Daniel's friend, Kingsley Eruku, shocked though not badly hurt, turned to Daniel, hoping all was well, but the sight appalled him. Blood was pouring from Daniel's nose from a head injury, and then he began vomiting blood from heavy internal hemorrhage. Rescue presently came. Marvelously, Daniel held up until he was placed in the local hospital's intensive care, or the Nigerian best equivalent of it. His wife, Nneka, was sent for. She found Daniel still alive, but only just. He hung on to life to ask her to have him taken to his family doctor's hospital in Uweri. A very serious mistake. It meant anything but a smooth ride of 1.5 hours. So the guy's in a serious car accident. The rescue comes and picks him up and takes him to the nearest hospital. And when his wife gets there, he asks her to transfer him 1.5 hours away to their hometown doctor. But within minutes of being lifted into the ambulance, Daniel felt himself dying. He tried to whisper his last words and instructions to Nneka. Especially, he begged her to see the work of their church continued. He also tried to inform her about 1 or 2 church situations she ought to be aware of, but his speech slurred, became incoherent, and stopped as he drifted into unconsciousness. Sounds bad. The ambulance driver pushed on, however. So the ambulance driver, despite the fact this guy was crashing, dying, continued on for the 1.5 hour drive, even though this turn for the worse happened within minutes here. There's lots about this story that I'm going to find really problematic, if not outright unbelievable. Reaching the Uweri Regional Hospital, they ran in shouting, "Emergency, emergency!" Yes, because you can drive 1.5 hours with an emergency. Daniel's doctor, however, wasn't on duty. Instead of a member of the medical staff took charge and checked Daniel's now limp form, he turned to them with a sad face. He could only certify that Daniel was already dead. His wife, Nneka, was naturally shocked. But a Bible verse had been ringing in her mind from Hebrews 11. Women received their dead raised to life again. An irrational conviction seized her. Well, I'm glad that they got that part, because it's definitely irrational. This meant her. She would see Daniel alive and well again. In what follows, Neka was the key figure. The testimony continues over a couple pages, essentially saying she wouldn't accept the plain evidence that Daniel had gone on or allowed him to be buried. Her agitation dictated that something must be done. They hurried to see Daniel's uncle. So now we got more family members involved. But that led him to his own doctor at the St. Eunice Clinic. Daniel was taken there, and seeking Neka's determination again, the doctor checked, and he could only confirm that death had taken place. The time registered was 11:30 p.m. on the day of the car accident. The doctor then wrote out his report on the decease of his patient and asked if they wished to have Daniel laid in the clinic's mortuary. They declined. Instead, they again moved the body to Daniel's father in the village near Owerri, and from there to the Ikaduru General Hospital mortuary, not far away. So he travels an hour and a half to get to his favorite doctor, who's not there. He's dead. Then the doctor confirms he's dead and says, hey, we can put him in our mortuary. And they're like, no, we want to take him to a different mortuary. Okay. The resident mortician, Mr. Barlington Armanu, also carried out the normal checks, and by then it was after midnight, 1 o'clock Saturday morning. So this story is essentially, now we've had it verified by 3 different people that he's dead. That's amazing. We had to make bunches of mistakes that perhaps led to a death in order to get a story that has 3 different people verifying the death. 2 different morticians, maybe 4 people. But the mortuary didn't have a cold storage facility, so the mortician administered the usual chemical injection and prepared the body for embalming the following morning. This is a point of contention as well. This continues on, and then Sunday, December 2nd, they went to take the body from the mortuary, but the mortician was worried about their intentions. To hide the fact that a body was being taken away as it was, with a 1.5-hour drive to Onitsha as a pretext, he dressed the body as for funeral, placed it in a coffin, and shut the lid. They took Daniel in his coffin and set off. This is what the mortician did because he was concerned about their motivations. He decided to dress the body for burial and put it in a casket. Several staff pastors were there. Reinhard Bonke knew nothing of this and was preaching and praying upstairs in the main auditorium. After a while, the pastors noticed a slight twitching of the stomach of the corpse. Then the corpse drew breath, and presently irregular breathing took place in short bursts, as they reported. Encouraged, the pastors threw themselves into powerful petitionary prayer, stripped the body of the mortuary gloves, socks, and shirt, and began massage head and foot, Daniel being, as said, as stiff as an iron rod. They asked for fans to be brought in to give Daniel more air to breathe as this news broke out, and the sanctuary above it created hysterical pandemonium. So backstage is a body that's starting to breathe again. Nobody's there laying on hands, nothing special. Just happened backstage. This clearly wasn't done for effect. It wasn't done on the main stage. It happened backstage, and yet pandemonium is breaking out upstairs. There's more. There are a number of people who investigated this, both skeptics who were denounced because they were skeptics. Here's a story from a website called Deception in the Church from other Christians who don't believe that this occurred. And this is the Wednesday, February 20th, 2002 edition, where Reinhard Bonke video documents modern-day Lazarus, Nigerian certified dead but revived days later at evangelist meeting. The dramatic documentary of a modern-day Lazarus has been released by international evangelist Reinhard Bonke. The German preacher who's led crusades in Africa for 30 years says that the remarkable resurrection of Daniel Ekechukwu is so well documented that no one can be unaffected by the report. Bonke's Christ for All Nations ministry has released a 45-minute video of Ekechukwu's testimony and also reported at its website how the Nigerian pastor had been certified dead and injected with embalming fluid before reviving 3 days later at a Bonke meeting. Ekechukwu's wife was so sure that God would bring her husband back to life after he was fatally injured in an auto accident that she persuaded the local mortuary to allow her to take his body to the church where Bonke was preaching. Their pastors lifted Ekechukwu from the coffin in which he'd been laid and were amazed when the man started breathing again as they prayed for him. The CFAN video includes footage of Ekechukwu beginning to stir and later returning to the mortuary where his body had been laid out. So this is about a year before that other webpage where someone is saying, we don't necessarily buy this, but they're selling a video for $35, which is based on testimony. There are a number of comparison charts and websites that have looked into this, and all anybody can say is that a bunch of people seem sincere, but we can't confirm any of the facts. And when we're talking about a near-death sort of scenario where someone appears dead, that is incredibly, well, it's far more common than people would think. There were reasons why we included alarms that people could ring in case they had been buried alive. There are lots of mistakes that are made. And when you look at someone and their pupils are fixed and dilated and you're not able to get a pulse and things look bad, especially if you don't have a lot of good medical equipment or you're not a particularly dedicated doctor or physician, you can mistake someone for dead. And so there can be people who are essentially near death, not quite dead, not dead yet. I'm not dead yet. Quiet. You'll be stone dead soon. That sort of thing happens. And no one needs to be lying about any of this story. I think that there's some exaggeration made. There's a couple of good comparison websites that go through the handful of sources that are available. And we have a source from Leo Igwe from CFI Nigeria, I believe. And then the rest of these are from either David Servant's ministry or CFAN or a news article that is using one of those as a source. So you have the pastor and his family and their testimony, and then you have testimony about their testimony. That's it. That's all this is. You have a handwritten, signed death certificate, which isn't even clearly for this person. And then there are disagreements between the stories about the date and time of the accident, who was a witness, whether or not he was embalmed, who was in the car. Was it his friend, Kingsley Iruku, or his brother, Kingsley Ekechukwu? What did the mortician say? Because he'd stopped breathing in an ambulance. When he arrived at the clinic, they advised him to take Daniel's body to the hospital, but he arrived at the Umar Zurike Hospital. A member of the medical staff told his wife that he was dead. Then he was supposedly taken to the mortuary, but another report says he was taken to the Federal Medical Center in Owerri, and then on to a clinic in his father's village. And whether or not he was embalmed is disputed as well, because one source says that he was embalmed, but there was no removal of organs. They injected with chemicals into the body to slow decay. Then two other sources say that a chemical was injected to prepare for embalming. Then another source says that embalming chemicals were injected between his fingers and into his feet. But, and this is from the skeptic who actually went and talked to the mortician told the skeptic he did not inject embalming fluid into Daniel at all. And the mortician decided to had a rather interesting story as well, saying that he was going to go do a full embalming, but he was disturbed because he heard singing and there was light emanating from the body and it was freaking him out. And so he didn't embalm. Whether or not he was put into a coffin or between two corpses or how long he sat there. Some people say 2 days, some 3 days at a minimum. People are like 42 hours. There's no vision. In one of the stories, there's no vision of anything in heaven. But there's other stories where he was visited by two angels, Daniel, and taken to heaven. He saw saints worshiping, saw Jesus as a white, bright light. Two angels lifted him up out of the ambulance and one angel took him to paradise. The accounts of this story are not such that we can go, oh, this is BS. Some people obviously made this up. It's all lies. That's a mistake. That's a mistake that people should not be making. At a minimum, we're at a point where we can't really reach a conclusion, But I'm not convinced that what's being reported here actually happened, at least not to the extent and in the way some people are trying to report it. And for me, the nail in the coffin, so to speak, for this particular account is this. We look at the world and say, hey, did the resurrection of Jesus occur? Why wouldn't God resurrect other people? In the Bible, he supposedly resurrected Lazarus and the dead marched on Jerusalem. Why aren't there modern day resurrections? And I asked that question during the debate, and this was the answer I got. There are. Here's an example. Well, in 2001, this supposedly happened. In 2002, it was already being disputed and challenged by other people, both within the church and within the skeptic community. And while these stories and testimonies exist on the website, it's not like there's hard evidence for any of this. And there's a video that you used to be able to get that has like 45 minutes of testimony from people who were involved. It's not the case that we can say, oh, they made all this up. This was a fraud perpetrated in order to get money and sell a video. What I think is more probable is that something bad happened, and because someone was wrongly declared dead and then revived at some point, the story got amplified. It turned into more of a tall tale. And what I find interesting is you won't find very many accounts of resurrections or claims of resurrections out in the world today. And when I asked for one during a debate, I got this one, and I got it right away. It was boom, this is it. He couldn't remember the guy's name, but I Googled it, hey, 2001, Nigeria, boom, got it. And I went in the Wayback Machine to see what cfan.org, the Christ for All Nations website, had on this. And then I went to the modern website for Christ for All Nations. You can go there yourself, cfan.org. They have a little search feature. And if you click on the search bar and you do a search for Daniel Ekechukwu, there are no results anywhere on their website for Daniel Ekechukwu. And if you do a search for resurrection, you'll find the one result under products, which is Broken Bread number 2. Then 2 crusades, miracles, old and new. The second one is, he was praying for the sick, saw a crippled man being powerfully touched by God in his seat, went down to pray for him. When I was there, a mother put a dead baby in my arms. Wow. This site's claiming that perhaps a baby was raised from the dead. It's a Holy Ghost party. There's 10 Bible studies. There's 3 TV episodes, Resurrection Sunday, all those. And then 6 TV offers. There's a $25 video on the resurrection of Jesus, a Resurrection Sunday print that you can buy, a Resurrection Sunday message DVD that you can buy, a Resurrection message DVD plus the Holy Spirit, Are We Flammable or Fireproof book for $35. Then there's the CFAN NIV live audio Bible experience for $45 and a Remembering Reinhard Bonnke, I don't know, memorial service. And yet, that's it. Here's a resurrection that my debate opponent remembered and believed enough to tell me about. And the primary ministry website that published this story in 2001, 2002, 2003, this amazing story of a resurrection, no longer exists on their website. A resurrection barely 20 years old went from being cited to just being believed and then being not talked about anymore. While a resurrection a couple thousand years old is the cornerstone of the very religion that's propping this up. I would argue that the fact that this ministry no longer publishes any content or sells any content related to this supposed resurrection suggests that the people running this ministry no longer have any confidence that this story is true. And certainly we can say, what was the point? That's a good question. Why would God resurrect this particular pastor? Is he somehow special? Did he do anything significant after this? It wasn't covered by any reliable news source, and this resurrection seems to only exist as a convenient "why don't resurrections happen now" sort of response. The internet's largely forgotten about it over the past 20 years. You have to go back in the Wayback Machine to find stuff. I don't know if you can still get a copy of the videos, but what did this resurrection accomplish? Apart from being a talking point for someone to say, oh, well, resurrections do still happen. I heard about one in Nigeria in 2001. Nothing else of substance came out of it. And you think the all-knowing, all-wise, all-powerful governor of the universe decided to save this Nigerian pastor, despite him being dumber than a sack of hammers, evidently, by saying, oh, I don't want to stay here. I want to go to my hospital, even though I'm going to probably die en route, etc. The testimony existed at cfan.org, was a primary selling point for a DVD, and now it does not exist. Now, that's not confirmation that it didn't happen. It's not confirmation that this isn't believable, but it's enough for me to say, why did I waste an entire day researching a resurrection that Caleb found convincing, and yet even the very ministry that published this 20 years ago no longer puts forward as if it's convincing. Anyway, best of luck in your research efforts, and if you get evidence for a resurrection, by all means, let somebody else know. I'd rather hear about it afterwards. Let somebody else do the research, because going through and trying to find this information after 20 years, while it's not that difficult in a modern age, is still annoying. When what you wind up with is, this is in no way good evidence or reasonably believable. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.